The evening air felt heavy as the young woman walked slowly along the street, holding her old backpack close to her chest. Her steps were soft, almost unsure, as if she was trying not to disturb anyone around her. She had been walking since morning, passing places where people laughed, ate, and lived their normal lives. Her stomach had been empty for hours, and she tried to ignore the sharp feeling of hunger that kept growing inside her. When she reached the small cafe on the corner of the street, she paused. Warm light spilled through the windows, and she could hear the quiet hum of conversations from inside. The smell of baked bread and hot soup drifted out each time the door opened. Her eyes rested on the piano inside, placed near the wall with soft lights above it. It had been a long time since she had touched a piano, but even seeing one made her heart feel both warm and heavy. She knew she didn't have money to buy food. She had checked her pockets over and over again, even though she already knew they were empty. But she also knew she couldn't walk much longer without eating something. So she stood in front of the cafe door, trying to gather enough courage to walk in. She whispered to herself, hoping the fear in her chest would quiet down. She didn't want to cause trouble. She didn't want anyone to feel annoyed by her. She only wanted a chance. Finally, she pushed the door gently and stepped inside. The warm air wrapped around her instantly. A few people turned to look at her, their eyes moving over her worn shoes, her tired face, and her old backpack. She gave a small smile, hoping they wouldn't stare too long. She walked toward the counter where the manager was ranging cups. "Excuse me," she said softly, almost afraid her voice might crack. The manager looked up, surprised to see her. He didn't say anything at first, waiting for her to continue. She gently pointed at the piano. May I play it?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but her hands were trembling slightly. "If you allow me to play 2 or 3 pieces, maybe I can have a small plate of food in return." The manager blinked, confused. He wasn't used to such requests. Before he could answer, a group of customers sitting at a nearby table overheard her. They exchanged glances with each other, and one of them let out a short laugh. Another whispered something under his breath, and soon the whole group was quietly laughing. The young woman lowered her eyes. She wasn't surprised. People often judged her before she had a chance to explain herself. She knew her clothes were old. She knew she didn't look like someone who belonged in a warm cafe with soft music playing. But she also knew she wasn't asking for much. Just a little food. Just a chance to use her gift. The manager cleared his throat. He wasn't sure what to say. "You want food in exchange for playing?" he asked slowly. She nodded. "Yes, only if it is allowed." Before the manager could reply, one of the customers decided to join the conversation. "Let her play," he said with a smirk. "It'll be fun to watch. Maybe she knows how to press the keys." His friends laughed again, not even trying to hide it this time. Another customer shook his head and whispered loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "People think anyone can walk in and perform now." The young woman heard everything, but she kept her calm expression. She had learned long ago that reacting only made things harder. She didn't come here to fight. She came because she was hungry, and she hoped her music could earn her something simple. The manager let out a slow breath and finally said, "All right, you can play 1 piece. If the customers don't mind." A few people shrugged. Some ignored the whole situation. Some watched with mild curiosity, and some continued to laugh quietly. The young woman gave a small nod. "Thank you," she said gently. She walked toward the piano with careful steps, as if approaching something delicate. As she stood near it, she placed her backpack on the floor. She touched the piano keys softly, almost with respect, as if greeting an old friend she had missed deeply. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. Her hands hesitated above the keys. The room behind her was full of mixed emotions: laughter, judgment, curiosity. But she didn't allow any of it to enter her heart. She focused only on the piano and the small hope she carried. She remembered the days when she used to practice for hours. The days when she had a small room with a window, sunlight hitting the piano keys as she played. Those memories felt distant now, almost like dreams. But the feeling of music inside her never disappeared. It remained alive, waiting for a moment like this. As she prepared to play, one of the staff members walked past her, rolling their eyes as if expecting nothing more than noise. The young woman heard the small sigh and felt a pinch of sadness, but she stayed calm. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, letting them rest there for a few seconds. The cafe grew quieter as some people leaned forward slightly, ready to see whether she would embarrass herself or surprise them. She took another breath, a deep, steady one, Then she played the first note. It was soft, warm, and clear. The sound filled the air like a gentle breeze. A few people looked up, surprised. She continued, her fingers moving slowly but with purpose. The melody grew richer, shaped with emotion and depth. The young woman didn't rush. She played as if every note carried a piece of her story. The cafe became silent, completely silent. Even those who had mocked her earlier sat frozen, watching her with wide eyes. But the young woman didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her eyes remained closed as she poured her feelings into the music, her hunger, her struggles, her loneliness, her memories of better days. As the melody flowed, time seemed to slow down. Conversations stopped. The sound of cups and plates faded. All that remained was the music and the quiet breath of the audience. For the first time in many months, she felt seen, not for her worn clothes, not for her tired face, but for her gift. And even though she had only asked for a piece of food, she gave the cafe much more than they expected. And as the room continued to grow still, the people who had laughed at her began to exchange uneasy glances, unsure how to react anymore. They had judged her before she even touched the keys. But now, the music was proving them wrong in the most gentle, undeniable way. The young woman continued to play, letting the notes rise and fall like a quiet conversation between her and the piano. She didn't know what would happen after she finished. She didn't know if the manager would keep his word. She didn't know if the people who mocked her would apologize. But for the moment, none of that mattered. She had entered the cafe hungry and tired. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt something warm in her chest, a small spark of hope. And as the last notes of her piece drifted softly through the air, the whole cafe stayed silent, waiting, listening, wondering who this young woman really was, this quiet stranger who had walked in asking only for food, but had given them something they never expected. The last notes of her melody were still floating in the air, when the young woman slowly lifted her hands from the piano keys. For a moment, she didn't move. She kept her eyes closed, breathing softly, letting the quiet settle around her. She didn't want to open her eyes too quickly and face the room. She wasn't sure what she would see: more laughter, more judgment, or something different. When she finally opened her eyes, she found the cafe unusually still. The manager stood frozen near the counter, holding an empty plate in his hand. A customer who had been stirring his tea earlier had paused midway. His spoon stopped in the air. Even the group that had laughed at her before now sat without a word. Their expressions changed into something she couldn't read. She looked down quietly, wondering if she had done something wrong. Maybe she had played too loudly. Maybe she had disturbed someone. She had forgotten how deeply she went into the music. She had forgotten she wasn't alone. Just when she was about to stand up, someone in the cafe clapped just once. A single, short sound. She looked up, unsure who it was. Then someone else clapped, and another followed. Soon, the entire cafe filled with applause that rose slowly, as if people were almost afraid to break the moment, but couldn't help themselves. The young woman blinked, surprised. Her fingers curled slightly on her lap, as if unsure whether she should stand or stay seated. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She wasn't used to being praised at all. One of the customers who had laughed earlier scratched his head and leaned back in his chair, looking embarrassed. He avoided her eyes, pretending to look outside the window. His friends also sat stiffly, shifting uncomfortably. That was something, one of them whispered under his breath, not loud enough for her to hear, but clear to the people sitting beside him. The manager placed the plate on the counter and slowly walked toward her. His expression had changed completely. Gone was the hesitation, the doubt. Now his eyes carried something closer to respect. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked softly. His voice was gentle, almost careful. The young woman looked up at him. "I learned when I was younger," she replied. "I practiced every day. I had a small piano at home back then. I don't have it anymore. But I still remember the things my teacher taught me." She said her words slowly, as if afraid someone might think she was lying. The manager nodded. He didn't push her for more details, even though he was curious. There was something fragile about her that made him want to handle the conversation with care. But not everyone in the cafe shared the same patience. A woman sitting closest to the piano leaned forward with interest. "You played like someone from a concert hall," she said. "You're really that hungry?" Her tone wasn't rude, just surprised. The young woman smiled faintly, looking at her hands instead of the woman. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," she said quietly. "I didn't want to bother anyone. I just thought maybe I could offer something in return instead of asking for help." without giving anything. So I asked if I could play. Just one piece. Her voice grew softer toward the end. The cafe became quiet again, not the uncomfortable silence from before, but a thoughtful one. People exchanged small glances. Many of them felt a little guilty. They had seen a tired girl asking for food and judged her before they even gave her a chance. They had laughed without knowing who she was or what she carried inside her. The manager gave a firm nod. "You'll get food," he said. "A proper meal, not just a small plate. Please wait here." His tone had changed, no longer doubtful, no longer unsure. It held a quiet respect. She lowered her head gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered as the manager walked away. The group that had mocked her earlier tried to act as if they hadn't said anything. One of them cleared his throat awkwardly and looked at his cup as if it suddenly became interesting. A man from another table stood up and slowly walked toward the piano. He was older, but his posture was straight. He had watched the entire scene without saying a word, and now he spoke for the first time. "You played with your heart," he said. "It's rare to see that these days. People play fast, loud, or impressive, but you played like someone who has lived many stories. It shows in your hands." He smiled kindly. The young woman's face warmed with a mixture of shyness and gratitude. No one had spoken to her like that in years. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once and returned to his seat. But even after he sat down, his eyes remained on her, full of thought. A few more minutes passed, and the cafe returned to its usual rhythm. Though the air still felt different, people went back to their conversations, but their voices were softer now. They still glanced at the young woman from time to time, but not with judgment, rather with curiosity and a hint of admiration. She stayed seated by the piano, gently touching a few keys to keep her hands busy. She didn't want to draw more attention to herself, but she also didn't know where else to look. Her stomach growled quietly, reminding her of why she came out at that moment. The manager returned, carrying a tray. The young woman looked up immediately. The tray held a bowl of warm soup, a piece of bread, and a small plate of rice with vegetables. It was more food than she expected. "Here you go," he said, placing it gently on the table near the piano. "Eat slowly. Take your time. If you need more, just tell me." Her eyes filled slightly, though she blinked quickly to keep her tears from falling. "Thank you. This means more than you know." He nodded, smiling a little. "We should have listened before judging. Your music spoke louder than anything else." The young woman began to eat slowly, savoring each bite. She didn't rush. She didn't want the moment to end too quickly. The warmth of the soup spread through her body, calming her hunger and her heart as she ate. The customers round her continued to watch her with quiet interest. The woman who had spoken earlier leaned over again. "Do you perform anywhere? I mean, or did you?" The young woman shook her head gently. "Not anymore. Life changed. I had to move often. I couldn't carry a piano with me," she said with a small smile. Someone else from another table added, "You should play in places where people can hear you. You have a gift." She didn't know how to answer. It wasn't that she didn't want to play. She simply had no place to practice, no place to stay long enough, no chance to show her talent. But before she could speak again, one of the customers from the mocking group finally stood up. His face looked stiff, as if he was struggling with his own thoughts. He approached her slowly. "Hey," he said, his voice unsure. I wanted to say sorry for earlier. I didn't think you could really play. I judged too fast." The young woman looked at him with calm eyes. She didn't seem angry. She didn't seem upset. She simply nodded. "It's all right," she said gently. "People see what they see from the outside. It happens." Her response made the man's shoulders relax slightly. He nodded back and returned to his table, where his friends quietly avoided looking at each other. After a while, the young woman finished her meal. She placed her spoon down and looked around the cafe. Something inside her felt lighter. For the first time in many months, she had been treated with kindness, not at first, but in the end. That was enough for her. But as she sat there, she didn't know that someone in the cafe had been watching her closely the entire time, not with judgment, not with hesitation, but with a thought forming in his mind, a thought that would change her life more than she could imagine. And while she didn't know it yet, her journey was only just beginning. The cafe slowly settled back into its warm evening rhythm, but something in the air had changed. People still talked, cups still clinked gently on saucers, and the lights still cast a soft glow across the wooden tables. But beneath all that normal movement was a quiet wonder, as if everyone was still holding on to the sound of the music the young woman had played. She sat quietly near the piano, her backpack resting against her leg. Her stomach was no longer hurting, and for the first time in many hours, she felt strong enough to breathe without worry. The food had warmed her body, but the kindness that followed warmed something deeper inside her. She didn't expect attention. She didn't want pity. She simply wanted to give something honest in exchange for something she needed. She hoped she hadn't caused any trouble. That thought still lingered in her mind while she sat there. The older man who had spoken kindly to her earlier watched her from across the room. His eyes were thoughtful, as if he was weighing a decision. Every now and then, he would glance at the piano, then back at her. Finally, he stood up. He walked toward her slowly, making sure he didn't approach too suddenly. When he reached the side of the piano, he stopped and offered a gentle smile. "Do you have a moment to talk?" he asked. She looked up at him, surprised. She nodded. Of course. He pulled a chair toward her and sat down, facing her but keeping a comfortable distance. His posture was calm and respectful. "I don't mean to pry," he began, "but your music, it touched something in this room. In me, too. I've listened to many players in my life, students, performers, travelers. But the way you played today had a story inside it." She lowered her gaze, feeling shy again. Compliments didn't usually come her way. "I'm glad someone enjoyed it," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure how people would react." He chuckled softly. "You have no idea what you did in this place. The whole room changed because of you." He paused. "That is not something everyone can do." The young woman didn't know what to say. She looked at her hands again. They were still slightly trembling, but not from hunger this time, from the attention she was not used to. The man continued in a gentle tone. "I'm a music teacher," he said. "I've been teaching for many years. I usually don't look for new students unless they come to me. But watching you today made me think. You still carry the heart of a pianist." The young woman blinked, confused for a moment. "A music teacher," she repeated softly. He nodded. "Yes, I run a small music school not too far from here. I've seen many talented students, but the kind of emotion you carry in your hands." He paused. "It's rare." A small silence passed between them. The young woman's heart beat a little faster. She didn't want to get her hopes too high. Life had taught her to keep expectations low so she wouldn't break again. "I don't have money," she said honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't pay for lessons or anything like that. I don't even have a stable place to stay." She said the words calmly, not because she wasn't embarrassed, but because she had already accepted her situation. The man nodded, as if he expected her to say that. "I didn't ask for money," he said warmly. "I'm offering help, if you want it. Not charity, just a chance." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you help someone like me?" He leaned back a little, folding his hands gently. "Because sometimes life brings people in front of us for a reason," he replied. "And because talent like yours shouldn't be left in silence. You've survived so much. I can hear it in your music." Her throat tightened for a moment. No one had ever spoken to her with such sincerity. But before she could respond, the cafe door opened and a cold breeze swept in. A few new customers walked inside, bringing a bit of noise back into the room. The man waited patiently, giving her space to think. After a long moment, she finally asked, "What would I have to do?" His smile deepened. "Nothing more than what you already did today," he said. "Play, practice, allow yourself to grow again." He paused. "If you agree, you can come to the school tomorrow morning. I'll show you around, introduce you to the rooms, and let you try one of the pianos there." Her breath caught inside her chest. Tomorrow morning. It sounded like a small thing, but for her, it felt like someone opening a door she thought was locked forever. I'll try to come," she said carefully. He nodded. "That's all I ask." Just then, the manager appeared again, this time wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked at the older man, then at the young woman, curious about their conversation. "Everything all right here?" the manager asked. "Yes," the man replied. "We were just talking about her future." The manager raised his brows with interest. "Her future?" The man nodded. "She has a gift, and I believe she deserves a chance to use it properly." The manager smiled gently. "I agree with that." Then he looked at the young woman. "You are welcome here anytime. If you want to play again, we would be happy to have you." Her eyes widened slightly. "Really?" "Of course," the manager said. "You brought something special to this place today." The young woman lowered her head again, touched by the kindness she was receiving. It felt strange, almost unreal. She didn't know how to react to genuine warmth anymore. For a while, she stayed seated, listening to the quiet sounds of the cafe. She watched people come and go, some smiling at her gently before they left. She wasn't used to being noticed in a positive way. The feeling made her chest tighten with a mix of fear and hope. As she prepared to stand up and leave, she noticed someone else approaching her, the same customer who had apologized earlier. He stopped near her, looking uncertain again. He began, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just wanted to say, your music reminded me of my sister. She used to play when she was little." He took a slow breath. "I shouldn't have laughed. It wasn't right." She looked at him calmly. "It's all right," she said softly. "People make mistakes." He nodded quickly, almost grateful for her gentle response. "Thanks," he muttered before walking away. After he left, the young woman took a deep breath. She put her backpack over her shoulder and stood up slowly. The older man watched her carefully. "Will you come tomorrow?" he asked one more time, not pushing, but wanting to be sure she understood she was truly welcome. She nodded. "I will try," she said again. "Thank you for giving me a chance." He smiled warmly. "Good, I'll be waiting." As she walked toward the exit, the cafe grew quiet again, not because she was leaving, but because some people simply couldn't stop watching her, wondering who she really was and where she had come from. The cold night air brushed against her as she stepped outside. She tightened her grip on her backpack and looked back at the cafe through the window. The lights inside looked warm, almost like a small world where she had finally been seen. With a slow breath, she began walking down the street. She didn't know where she would sleep that night. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something new, the beginnings of hope. A chance at a new chapter, a chance to return to the music she loved, a chance to step out of the shadows she had lived in for so long. And as she disappeared into the quiet evening streets, her heart carried a soft, steady promise she hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow might change everything. Here is part 4, written in simple English, human-centric, and natural tone. No headings are added, and no restricted names are used. The next morning came with a soft light shining through the thin curtains of the small room where she slept. She woke up slowly, still holding the feeling from the night before. The applause, the smiles, the unexpected kindness she received from strangers who had no reason to care about her. It all stayed with her. But as she sat up on the thin mattress, she reminded herself that one good night didn't change her life. She still needed to survive. She still needed food. Her stomach made that clear. She tied her hair back the same way she always did, simple and neat. The piano from yesterday felt like a dream, like something too beautiful to belong in her real world. Still, she carried the memory with her as she stepped outside. The streets were already busy. Vendors shouted prices, children ran after each other, and workers hurried toward their day. She watched them quietly. She always watched. She had learned that watching people taught her more than anything else. It taught her how to move through the world without causing trouble. She had been doing that all her life. She walked toward the market because she knew that was where she might find someone kind enough to give food in exchange for music. Not everyone liked the idea. Many laughed. Some even got annoyed. But she couldn't let that stop her. She had no other choice. When she reached the market, she approached a small bakery first. The warm smell of bread almost pulled her inside by itself. The baker, a man with a heavy voice, looked at her as soon as she stepped forward. "What do you want, child?" he asked. She spoke softly, but with courage she had gathered since last night. "If I play something, may I have a small piece of bread?" He blinked, confused for a moment, then let out a short laugh. "Play? Do you see a piano here?" She looked down. "No, sir." "Then go on," he said, waving his hand toward the street. "Try somewhere else. I don't have time for jokes." His words weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. She stepped back without arguing. She never argued with grown-ups. She simply moved on. She walked further, unsure where to go next. She carried a folded note in her pocket, an address someone from the party had given her last night. The woman who slipped her the note told her to visit if she ever needed help. But she wasn't ready. She didn't want to look desperate or greedy. She wanted to earn whatever she received. Still, the note stayed in her pocket like a warm reminder that maybe, for the first time, someone believed in her. She reached a small outdoor cafe near the corner of the market. People sat there drinking tea and talking about ordinary things: work, children, prices, neighbors. A piano stood inside the cafe behind the glass wall. It wasn't fancy, but it was real, and real was all she needed. She stood outside for a long moment, thinking. Should she go in? Would they laugh again? Would they think she was just a hungry girl pretending to be something she wasn't? Her stomach tightened again, reminding her that she couldn't think too long. She stepped inside. The cafe owner, a woman with a tired but gentle face, looked up. Yes, she asked. The girl spoke slowly. May I play something? Just one piece, if that is okay. The owner looked at her from head to toe, then glanced at the piano. You know how to play that? She nodded. And why do you want to play? The woman asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I just need a small piece of food. There was silence for a moment. Not unkind silence, just surprise. Come here, the owner finally said. The girl walked toward the piano. Her fingers touched the keys gently, like greeting an old friend she wasn't sure she deserved to meet again. Go on, the owner said quietly. She took a breath, a deep one. Then she began to play. The sound filled the cafe in a soft wave, slow at first, then growing stronger as her confidence returned. People turned their heads. Conversations faded. Cups paused halfway to lips. Even those sitting outside glanced through the glass. Her hands moved with the calm grace of someone who had learned music long before she learned anything else in life. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't try to show off. She simply played the way she always did, honest, clear, and full of feeling. A small child sitting near the counter tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mama, she plays like the music on the radio, he said. The mother nodded, watching closely. Better, she whispered. The owner of the cafe stepped forward slowly, her expression softening with every passing second. She had expected a child hitting random notes. Instead, she saw something rare, real talent, pure and untouched by pride. When the girl finished, the cafe was quiet for a few seconds more. Then soft applause broke out, rising from every corner of the room. She looked up, eyes wide. She had never expected applause, not here, not today. The owner walked behind the counter and brought out a small plate with warm bread, cheese, and a boiled egg. It was more food than the girl had hoped for. The owner placed the plate in front of her. Eat, she said gently. You earned it. The girl's breath shook. She whispered, thank you, and sat down to eat. She didn't rush. She took small bites, savoring every moment. After a few minutes, the owner sat at the table with her. Where did you learn that? She asked. The girl hesitated. My mother used to teach me. When she stopped. Her voice faded. The owner didn't push. She simply nodded. Do you live nearby? The woman asked. The girl shook her head. Do you go to school? Another slow shake. Do you have anyone to look after you? The girl held her hands together in her lap. Not really. The owner took a breath. She looked around at the cafe, her small world of tables, cups, and soft morning chatter. She seemed to be thinking carefully. If you want, the woman said, you can come here every day. You can play for a few minutes in the morning. People enjoy it. And in return, I will give you food. The girl froze. She didn't know what to say. The woman continued. You don't owe me anything. This cafe could use a bit of life, and you bring that. So if you want the job, it's yours. A job. She had never had a job before. She didn't even know if she was allowed to have one. But the woman's eyes held no trick, no pity, only kindness. I would like that, the girl finally said. Good, the woman replied with a small smile. Then come tomorrow, and the next day. We'll figure things out together. The girl nodded, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Not completely, but enough to breathe. As the day went on, the cafe filled with more people. Some came just to hear the girl play again. Others came because the cafe felt different now, warmer, somehow. And the girl, sitting quietly with her plate, watched all of this with a sense of quiet wonder. She didn't know what her future looked like. She didn't know if the world would stay kind or turn rough again. But for the first time in many months, she felt a small light inside her that refused to go out. And she knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, she would return. She would play again. And she would keep moving forward, step by step, note by note. Because maybe, just maybe, life was finally starting to change for her. The evening light outside the cafe had turned soft and golden, and the warm glow slipped through the windows as the young woman sat quietly near the piano. Her meal from earlier was finished, but the gratitude she carried from that moment was still fresh. She had never expected so many people to stop and listen to her, much less applaud her or offer her help. For a long time, she had felt invisible to the world. Yet today, for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. The manager walked over to her again, wiping his hands on a clean towel. His voice was gentle now, Nothing like the hesitant tone he had used earlier when she first walked in. He told her that customers were still talking about her performance, saying it had brought something special into the cafe. She listened quietly, unsure how to respond, but she managed a small smile. The manager then asked if she might consider playing again sometime, maybe even on weekends. Not in exchange for food but for payment. She stared at him for a moment, surprised. She had never thought of playing in a place like this, much less earning something from it. Her whole life had been about surviving day by day, not planning for the future. After a pause, she said she would like that very much, though her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. It was the first time in a long while she had heard herself say yes to something hopeful. At the far end of the cafe, the man who had introduced himself as a music teacher waited patiently. He nodded at her with a kind smile, inviting her to join him at a small table. She walked over, still unsure if all of this was truly happening or if it was just a brief moment of kindness that would fade. But when she sat down, the teacher spoke to her with sincerity. He said her talent was rare, not just because she played well, but because she played with emotion, real emotion that came from a life lived with struggle and heart. He asked her a few questions about her past lessons. She explained how she had trained in a small music school for a short while, how she had loved it, how she had practiced every day until things fell apart at home. She told him how she had left because she could no longer afford it, and how her life had taken unexpected turns. Through it all, she had carried her love for music, even if she had no real chance to use it. The teacher listened closely, nodding with understanding. Then he made an offer she never expected. He said he wanted to help her return to serious practice, free of cost. He said someone with her gift should not be hidden from the world. She stared at him, stunned by the idea that someone would give their time and effort to help her without asking for anything in return. She felt her chest tighten with emotion, but she forced herself to stay steady. She asked him why he wanted to help her. He smiled softly and said that sometimes talent appears in the most unexpected places, and it deserves a chance. He said the world needed more genuine players like her, people who played from the heart, not just for show. As the teacher spoke, she felt something gentle rise inside her, something she had not felt in years. Hope, real hope, the kind that made her believe that she might actually have a future, beyond wandering from place to place. The manager came back again, this time holding a small envelope. He handed it to her and said it was from a customer who had been too shy to speak to her directly. The envelope held a small amount of cash, along with a note that read, "Your music touched my heart today. Please take care of yourself." She held the note carefully, as if it were something precious. As the cafe began to close, she remained seated at the piano. She placed her fingers gently on the keys once more, not to perform for anyone, but simply to feel the comfort of the instrument under her hands. She played a soft melody, one she had created long ago when she needed to calm her mind. This time, however, it sounded different. It sounded like a new beginning. The teacher watched her quietly from a distance. He saw the way her shoulders slowly relaxed, the way her breathing settled. He recognized the look in her eyes, a mix of relief and longing, as if she had been holding herself together for far too long. He did not interrupt her playing. He simply let her have that moment. When she finished, she looked up and saw him waiting. She stood up slowly and approached him. He told her they could begin lessons as soon as she was ready. She nodded, though inside she felt nervous. But the thought of learning again, of improving, of playing not just to survive, but to grow, it filled her with a sense of purpose. She had almost forgotten. The manager then stepped forward and gave her a small printed schedule. He said she could perform at the cafe twice a week if she wished. Nothing fancy, nothing overwhelming, just a chance to play and earn. She thanked him softly. It felt strange to be treated with such kindness after so many days of silence and struggle. When she finally stepped out into the cool night air, she paused outside the cafe door. The sky was deep blue, scattered with a few early stars. She wrapped her arms around herself, not because she was cold, but because the day had felt unreal, almost dreamlike. She looked at her reflection in the window, still the same worn clothes, still the same tired eyes, but she felt different on the inside. She walked slowly down the sidewalk, feeling each step with a calm she hadn't felt in a long while. Her life had been uncertain for so long, yet now it felt like the world had opened a small door for her, a door she never expected, but one she was finally brave enough to step through. As she reached the corner of the street, she stopped and looked back at the cafe. She could still hear faint echoes of her own music, as if the sound had stayed behind to remind her that she mattered. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be days when she felt lost, hungry, or unsure of herself. But now, for the first time in a long while, she had people willing to stand with her. People who believed in her. She took a deep breath and kept walking, clutching the small envelope to her chest. She didn't know exactly where life would take her next, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never let go of her music again. And somewhere in her heart, she whispered a quiet promise to herself that one day, she would play on a stage big enough for the world to hear her story. Not because she wanted fame or attention, but because she wanted to share the same calm and hope that music had given her. The night grew softer around her as she walked away, but she didn't feel alone anymore. For the first time in years, she carried something stronger than fear or hunger. She carried possibility.